Have you ever wished your paintings felt freer, more alive, less like perfect replicas and more like true expressions of your voice as an artist? Or I guess another way to ask this, are you sick of your paintings feeling like you're just a glorified photocopier? If so, you're in the right place. In today's video, I'm going to share 5 simple changes that you can make, decisions you only need to make one time that right away will help you to bring more looseness and more life into your work. As you watch me paint this piece from life, we're going to explore why ditching photo references, embracing blur and lack of details, and even making physical changes in your setup can unlock the expressive, painterly style that you've been chasing. By the end of this video, you're gonna know exactly how to start building the muscle memory you need for looser, more vibrant work. This is one I'm gonna be really upfront where the specific supplies aren't really what's making or breaking it, but I know some of you will have questions. So first things first, I'm gonna be painting from life for this video. So here is a quick look at what our model, Joel, looks like all set up for this particular piece. Funnily enough, I took a photograph for this so I could share it with you, but I didn't actually work from this photograph at all. Then, as far as my palette goes, I am using my Strata Mini for this painting session today because it wasn't in my home studio. It was over at East Oaks. And here are the paints that I'm going to be using. So I have titanium white, yellow ochre, terra rosa, transparent oxide red, ruby red. This is the same pigment as permanent rose, viridian, ultramarine. And then for my medium today, I'm using a combination. What I have right here is Gamblin's solvent-free gel medium. And I also use Galkid at the early stages of this painting, actually as an alternative to using Gamsol for my block-in. So when you see me going about this block-in and you see me kind of laying in some thinner passes of background, just know that this is actually being done using Galkid this time because I'm experimenting with ways of reducing the amount of solvent that I'm exposed to. Now, with those basics out of the way, let's go ahead and dive into these 5 simple steps you can go ahead and take to start loosening up your work right away. Let's start with the biggest shift, ditching photo references and starting to paint more from life. So here's the thing. When you paint from photos, it's really easy to get sucked into copying every tiny detail. And cameras are really good about putting in those crisp details and hard edges. And so it's so easy to really get pulled into that place of feeling like in order to create a successful painting, you have to translate all of those minute details from the photograph. But painting from life really forces you out of that. Even if you were really close to your model or whatever it is you happen to be painting, which chances are you aren't that close. But even if you were, you can typically see a lot less detail, a lot less information than you can when you are working from a photograph. Here are some of the big things that I noticed here on this painting that I'm making in this video that really stood out to me. The first one is something that happens pretty universally across the board, and that is that you see so much more color when you're working from life. Now, I know that this video is about loose painting, but for painters who are really interested in bold brushwork, there tends to be quite a lot of overlap between those painters and the painters who really want to get interesting, vibrant color into their work. And this can be true whether you want a painting that has really loud color or you want something that's a little bit more muted and subtle. The truth is, cameras really struggle to see color the way our eyes do. And so working from life and ditching the photo often really helps you to inject more color into your work. Not only that, but because you are working from the perspective of having binocular vision, so the viewpoint of both of your two eyes combined, what this enables is you get a much greater sense of the 3D form of an object. So if you have this frustration with your work when you're working from photographs where it just feels kind of flat, working from life can very quickly allow you to start capturing that dimensionality that you're looking for. In this painting, we were really set up for success here because my friend Lewis, who runs East Oaks, this is his studio. We had the model set up on the model stand. We had the lights ready to go. And Lewis was also really thoughtful in the colors that he had our model Joel wear. So right away, we had some really great, strong lighting. Joel came prepared. He looked polished. We were so excited to be able to capture just how dapper he is in this painting. So the mustache was styled and just perfect for this painting. So when it comes to everything from the lighting and the shadow pattern on his face to the colors he was wearing and thus the colors that were bouncing back into his skin tone for this portrait, we were really set up for success. And for this next step, we're going to talk about how to take this even further and avoid the trap of overworking details so that you can concentrate on the overall feeling of the piece. So the next really important tool in your toolkit is to embrace the blur. And the way that I'm doing this for this painting is I'm taking off my glasses and I'm getting a little bit of distance from the model as well. If you're like me and you wear glasses, this tip is really a game changer. Take them off. At least if you're like me and your prescription is a little on the weaker side. If you don't wear glasses, you can simply squint to intentionally blur your vision. All right, so why does this make a difference? Because blurring really simplifies what you're seeing, forcing you to focus on the big impressions of shapes rather than getting lost in the weeds of tiny details. I once saw this illustrated in a lecture that James Gurney gave at Portrait Society of America. It was such an impactful example that he gave. So what he did was he had a PowerPoint up and he showed us a bunch of images of blurred faces, and they were really, really blurred. And what was so cool was you couldn't even pick out an eye or a nose or a mouth. But even though they were so blurry that you couldn't make out a single detail, you could pick out, hey, that's George Washington, or that's Barack Obama, or any number of celebrities, people that most of us know just by sight. It is so tempting as painters to believe that being able to capture a likeness comes from getting all the teeny tiny details right. But the truth is that the likeness really comes from this very hazy, blurry amalgamation of shapes that are just laid out in the right proportion. So, for example, in this painting from life, when I took off my glasses and I used the natural blur to eliminate the minute textures and details, and instead focus on the contrast between just light and shadow, this immediately made my brushwork looser, and counterintuitively, it made it more confident. And the reason is that I wasn't having to second guess whether I needed to start whittling down those shapes. I could just say, hey, if I'm getting this blurry impression of the model and I can tell I'm looking at the model, and I just get that same kind of blurry impression down on my canvas, it's going to look like him. This is such a simple trick, but it has a huge impact on how you approach your painting from the start all the way to the very end. And my next trick goes hand in hand with this, and that is to back up by forcing yourself to paint at a distance. So there's a couple of ways to do this, but before I dive into the strategies, let me explain what I mean by this step. So another way that you can force looseness into your process is to physically step back. This essentially gets you more of that blurred impression that you get by squinting or taking off your glasses. In this case, the primary way that I'm getting distance is that I literally set my easel up, 10 feet away from the model. I'm absolutely guessing here. I'm not that great at judging distances. But another way you can do this, and you can actually take this and make it even more effective, is regardless of where you place your easel relative to the model, move your palette farther away from your easel so that in order to mix up your paint, you have to not only back away from the model, you have to back away from your painting as well. This habit not only helps you to see your painting as a whole, but it also helps to keep you from getting hyper-focused on small details, whether we're talking about details on the model or details in your painting. So again, for this particular painting, I'm in a little bit of a disadvantage because my palette is built into my easel. And not only that, I also had my camera to contend with, and I was a little bit worried that if I was backing up really often, I might accidentally back into my camera and knock it over, which would not make for good painting footage for this video. But if I were in my studio and I were going to run with this advice that I'm giving you right here, what I would do is set the easel up first, and then take the table that your palette is on. For some of you, this is going to be something like a tabouret. For others, it might be just a simple glass palette that you can put on a tabletop. Go ahead and move that about 8 feet back from your easel. That way, every single time you need to reload your brush or mix up a color, you have to take yourself 8 feet away from your painting. It's gonna feel awkward at first, and in a way, it's a little bit like making yourself a treadmill desk that you're painting from because you're gonna be doing a lot of walking. But this is a really great way to keep your focus on the big picture rather than obsessing over a tiny little detail that's ultimately just gonna make your painting look overworked. Because remember, the likeness comes from the relationships of the big shapes, not the tiny details. Don't believe that part of your brain that's whispering to you that if this tiny detail is just right, the whole thing will come together. That voice in your head is lying. Next up, simple tool number 4 that you can put to use to immediately see an improvement in your brushwork, and that is to only use large brushes. So one of the most effective ways to break the habit of tight, controlled painting is to simply put your small brushes out of reach. Put them away. I mean it. Stash them somewhere out of your reach, or don't bring them to your painting session. Instead, only use brushes that are big enough to cover significant areas of the canvas. So in this piece, I primarily used brushes that I would normally grab for the block-in stage. This forced me to make really bold decisions and lay down confident, intentional brushstrokes. It also made it impossible to get caught up in small, fiddly details too early, which is a common mistake that painters make when trying to paint loosely. For this painting, what that meant I was using brush-wise would typically be somewhere between a size 4 and size 8 flat or filbert. And just so that you can put any hesitation out of your mind, one thing that I found really helpful was to make sure that some of these brushes had a really crisp edge to them. I find that this is a little bit easier to achieve with a softer synthetic brush. So I have something like a Creative Mark Qualita flat or a Rosemary Evergreen flat. What I like about these brushes is they are really, really crisp, and I can get a really sharp edge or a sharp corner so that even though the brush is big, I can actually get a really thin line or a really small mark if I just angle the brush correctly. So this is a way that you can immediately ditch the small brushes and really take them out of your workflow for a while without sacrificing your ability to go more in depth into those details. Now let's move on to the final step, which is to limit your time or your brushstrokes. So the final tip in this video is about creating constraints. Limit your time or the number of brushstrokes that you allow yourself to use in a painting. By doing this, you shift your focus away from being able to make a perfect painting to simply practicing looser techniques and building up the right kind of muscle memory. For this painting, we had a constraint built in already. we only had about 3 hours total with this model. And while I took a photo so that I could show you all what our setup looked like of the model, I wasn't going to work from that photograph. I told myself that once we were done working from life, we were done. You can do something really similar for yourself by setting a time limit or by telling yourself that you have to count every brushstroke that goes down. You don't necessarily have to have a number that you're aiming for. Chances are that just by having to count them, you will really start to notice that you are limiting those brushstrokes. I was just chatting with a painter who was describing her issue with perfectionism and that her standard for whether or not she was successful was whether or not she liked the final painting she made. And that makes sense. It is totally logical to think that way. In fact, I often think that way myself. I think all of us do. But the problem with it is that it actually flies in the face of what we really need in order to grow. Painting loosely is a question of mastery. It's a question of long-term mastery. And achieving long-term mastery over anything comes down to the overall trajectory that you're on, not the painting you made on one specific day. Naturally, you're going to have paintings that are absolute flops. You're going to have paintings that are awesome successes. But the biggest predictor of your success isn't any one of those paintings. It's showing up over and over, week after week, and putting in practice. And by telling yourself that you're not giving yourself enough time or enough brushstrokes to actually bring this to a perfect finish, you are essentially reinforcing this mode of working. You're telling yourself what matters is the effort you're putting in day after day, not the outcome on one particular canvas. It just so happened that I loved the outcome that I got on this painting. But the truth is I have plenty of paintings where the outcome is frustrating to me, but the act of getting in that practice far outweighs the impact of feeling a little bit frustrated with a painting, or even maybe feeling a lot frustrated with a painting. So in this painting, knowing that we only had 3 hours with the model, and it wasn't even 3 hours because we were giving the model breaks throughout this session, it forced me to really figure out how to be efficient with the information I was putting down. It prevented me from overthinking every decision, and it discouraged me from getting sucked into detail that ultimately wouldn't really impact the final outcome of the piece the way that I wanted. So the goal wasn't to make a masterpiece, it was to practice being looser and explore what's possible when I worked within these constraints. And what naturally followed is that my flow of painting wound up sounding something like this. In the early stages of this piece, I was just thinking to myself, what would this look like if I had to stop the painting right now? In the first 5 minutes, in the first 20 minutes, in the first 45 minutes. It really encouraged me to think about creating a block-in that would be beautiful, preventing that block-in from getting overworked right from the beginning. Now, I would say, in my experience, this is a little bit more advanced of a way of thinking, but it's appropriate for where I am on the journey right now. I can give myself operating instructions that are that loose or that vague and have it really work. But even if you're not there at that stage on the journey yet, I think you'll find that setting these constraints and taking perfection off the table really sets you free to play and experiment and simply grow the way you really need to paint the way you've been dreaming of painting. If you're serious about loosening up your paintings, these 5 strategies can make a huge difference. Ditching the photos, or at least reducing your reliance on them. Embracing blur, backing up, using big brushes, and focusing on building muscle memory instead of getting perfect outcomes. Each one is a small shift, but together you'll really see how they have this snowball effect on the way that you paint. Today, I used all of these tools in my process, and I can't wait to hear which ones you're excited to try first. Let me know in the comments what resonated with you, or if you have your own tips for painting more loosely without sacrificing the realism. I would love to hear them. And by the way, if painting from life is something that you've been wanting to do, but it's intimidating, make sure that you subscribe, because coming up, I have a video all about setting up a model in your own space when you do not have any of the formal setup that I had in this video. So this is going to be perfect for artists who feel a bit intimidated about bringing someone in to paint from. So make sure that you subscribe so you don't miss that video. And if you're getting ready to take your painting to the next level, if this is something that you're really committed to making happen this year, be sure to grab my free PDF on mastering painterly expression and taking your work to a new level of looseness in 2025. It's linked down in the description below, and I'll also pin it in the comments as well. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, keep experimenting, keep exploring, and above all, keep painting. I hope you have fun.